Texas A&M University. Can you hear me okay? Now you can? Can you hear now? Okay, they just turned me on. Thank you. My name is Joe Goldson. I'm director of the French Institute at Texas A&M University. And it's a real pleasure this evening to welcome you to listen to Pascal Bruckner. Pascal Bruckner is undoubtedly France's most famous public intellectual. He's written numerous books translated into many languages. He writes political essays, novels, films, plays. He's just a remarkably gifted and energetic person, and it's my pleasure also to tell you that he's a friend of Texas A&M University and been here several times since 2005, I think is what he just told me, the first time right after Hurricane Katrina. So let me give you just a few titles to give you some idea of the range of his interests and also just the range of his intellect. These are the titles of several of his books that have been translated into English. Tears of the White Man, Democratic Melancholia, I Suffer, Therefore I Am, My Father, the Anti-Semite, The Tyranny of Guilt, An Imaginary Racism, and last but not least, the title for this evening's talk is very much along the same lines. It is called Europe, From Fairy Tale to Subjugation. Professor Bruckner.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for your kind words. And thank you, every one of you, for being there tonight. So my expose will be about one question. Is the re-election of Donald Trump good news or bad news for Europe? And I will try to give you a nuanced answer. 3 weeks ago, I was in Chisinau, Moldavia, a former Soviet republic stuck between Romania and Ukraine for a literary festival, just a weekend of the legislative elections. The European pro-camp won in spite of intense Russian propaganda. And once more, during that weekend, I have been surprised by a paradox. Outside of Europe, nations and peoples dream of integrating the EU, while Europeans inside the Union dream of leaving it. Europe cannot be so desired by others and so unloved by itself. First part, the fairy tale. To understand the contemporary Europe, we must go back to the aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall to understand the mentality of our continent. In 1989, Western Europe, the maximum of diversity in the minimum of space, entered the era of the fairy tale. It only listened to the political scientist Francis Fukuyama, who sold it an idea born in Prussia with Hegel in the 19th century, that of the end of history. For our elites back then, there was no doubt that our little Western Cape prefigures the future. The conjunction of the market economy, parliamentary democracy, and the rule of law would forever obliterate the old theater of conflicts and discipline the aggressive instinct of the people. Europe, guilty of having dragged the world into 2 world wars, of having given birth to imperialism and colonialism, promised to mend its ways and impose peace throughout the world. At last, we could reap the dividends of peace, especially since it was accompanied by a drastic reduction in military budgets in all the countries concerned, including France and Great Britain. War was just a bad memory of the ancient times, and we could face a new period of history. This admirable ambition did not resist the return of violent passions and the multiplication of armed conflicts. When Putin's Russia awoke and Islamist terrorism struck in all 4 corners, Europeans realized, dismayed, that their wisdom was another name for impotence, and spontaneously they placed themselves under the protective wing of Uncle Sam. They rediscovered the debtor complex without the help of the Allies in 1917, but especially in 1944, the whole world would have been purely and simply wiped off the map or permanently colonized by Nazi troops or Soviet troops. In Europe, democracy is what remains when all other dreams have been abandoned. A very diverse space in which one can live well, realize oneself, and perhaps get rich in proximity to cultural masterpieces. An admirable ambition, to be sure, since this kind of government limits the damage to human life and abstains from violence. This calm would be perfect in a time of great serenity, in a world in which perpetual peace finally prevailed. But there was a striking contrast between the ideals that Europeans told each other they enjoy, the rule of law, dialogue, respect, tolerance, multilateralism, and the tragedies that the world all around them was experiencing. Autocratic Russia, aggressive Iran, the Near East in tatters, Africa devastated by civil wars, North Korea and China threatening, and Islamic terrorism inside our countries. Europe in 1999 no longer believed in evil. It knew that disputes could be settled by consultation. It no longer loved history. The latter was a nightmare, a minefield from which we first emerged with great effort in 1945 and then again in 1989 after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was of this poison by means of norms, rules, procedures. And since history continued this way without us, the old world left to others, mainly the United States, the task of taking charge of it, while violently criticizing these others for their archaism. Europe no longer knew enemies, only misunderstandings to be solved by discussions and concessions. If we are nice to them, they will be nice to us. And if an argument arises, it is always our fault. We did not behave as we should have. One recent example, when German airports have been recently flown over by Russian drones, many German citizens blamed the Berlin government for being too harsh and too aggressive with Putin. Let us be gentle, let us compromise. And if the Russians are aggressive, let us abandon to them the country they covet, Georgia, Poland, Baltic republics, Ukraine, or Moldavia. Why bother for these faraway people? Who wants to die for Kyiv? Who wanted to die for dancing in 1939? This also explains why European countries have massively demobilized since the end of the previous century. Why continue to spend money in maintaining armies, build tanks and cannons since war, this terrible tragedy of ancient times, is behind us. Europe, which thinks it has entered the post-national and post-historical phase, sees itself as the wisdom of the world. We no longer like war, and we consider the soldier as an archaic figure, scarcely to be tolerated and soon to be replaced by the diplomat, the physician, the nurse, the rescuer, with modest ambition and gentler methods. The rejection of armed conflicts is directly connected in Europe with the development of individualism and the decline of nationalism. To die for my country, for an ideology, for a principle superior to my own individual existence has become inconceivable. The old cry of the German pacifists during the Cold War, better red than dead, is now again a conviction widely shared in Europe. Unfortunately for us, when actual war comes back on our soil, like in Ukraine, 2 hours from Paris by plane, we are naked. Europe, deprived of credible political and military tools, still depends on its Yankee big brother for its defense. In fact, in spite of the fact that 2 countries have kept a solid army, France and UK, which possess a nuclear weapon. The citizens of the old world think that by ceasing to kill each other and erecting the slogan, "Never go to war again," into an untouchable dogma, they have done all that was necessary. This magnificent motto, from which many a lesson can be drawn, omits one detail. Europe, deprived for the moment of credible political and military tool, still depends on the USA for its defense, and especially of NATO. A strange inconsistency. We never cease cursing the United States, but we do nothing to free ourselves from its tutelage. The more we vituperate America, the more we make ourselves dependent on it, like a child who revolts against his parents, but never leaves them. But where the Russian bear threatens Europe, the latter turns toward Washington and begs for help. Germany, France, England, Poland, who had sworn to increase the military budget after February 1222, still need more than ever the assistance of the Pentagon to resist the hybrid war waged by Vladimir Putin. Since the war in Ukraine broke out, a new age of empire has opened, structured around zones of influence where might prevails over right. Peace is impossible, war is omnipresent against a backdrop of the liberation of violence and the breakdown of the rules that contain it. Globalization has splintered into rival economic blocs with no other regulation than the power of competitors. Europe, which claimed to base peace on trade and law, and opted for the side of its domestic market to establish its influence, is threatened again with subjugation, caught between a predatory America, a once imperial Turkey, a China in full dumping mode, and a carnivorous Russia. And we are the herbivorous. Europe is not only weak and rich, it is divided. Among its members, many are already sleeping with the enemy. I mean Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia, openly pro-Russian and openly hostile to the Ukrainians. And inside our own countries, many so-called sovereignist parties, in the name of peace, rise from Moscow. In France, La France Insoumise and Rassemblement National, far left and far right, as the AfD in Germany, Reform UK in England. Usually nationalistic and chauvinistic, they claim to care only for their own voters and do not want to spend local money for foreign and faraway countries. Second part, Europe in vassalism. It is a nightmare scenario that is sending shivers down Copenhagen's spine. To force Denmark to send Greenland to the USA, the White House could cut off all internet connection to the small Scandinavian kingdom, depriving it of Facebook, Instagram, X, and Starlink until it gives in. How can you resist Trump's UKs when you can no longer communicate with your loved ones? On July 27 of this year, during a meeting in Scotland on the presidential golf, Ursula von der Leyen, who is the head of Europe, with a contrite expression and knees pressed together like a little girl, ratified with Donald Trump an agreement that constituted a total surrender for Europe, 1.2 trillion of commitments to America in exchange for a few crumbs for us. But the submission wouldn't be complete if the head of the White House did not now demand that Europe abolish the DSA, Digital Services Act, guilty of hindering American tech companies, a rule concocted by Thierry Breton, former European Commissioner for the Internal Market from 1219 to 1224. Finally, let us remember the candid admission of Scott Bessent, American Secretary of the Treasury, on August 19 to Fox News. We sell weapons to Europeans, we resell them to the Ukrainians, and the president takes a 10% margin of the weapons. The 10% will cover the cost of air protection. This is no longer aid, it might be called extortion. Donald Trump, a belligerent pacifist, will perhaps be remembered as the first American president to say out loud what his predecessor murmured in hushed tone. Europe must at last pay for its defense, take responsibility, and emerge from adolescence. And unfortunately, we have to admit that he is perfectly right. Taking advantage of this dependence, Donald Trump is reviving an old third worldist notion, that of unequal exchange, supposedly representing the relationship between the plundering of the nation on the South, and the Western world. The Republican elected president won on a brilliant intuition to persuade Americans that they are the new damned of the earth, that they are emerging from the democratic Middle Ages to enter the light of the Republican Golden Age. The trick is enormous, and it took incredible propaganda to present the USA, the richest country in the world, as the scapegoat of humanity. In what way Trumpism, like wokeism, is steeped in the victim ideology of which it is content to broaden the target. No longer minorities or LGBT people, but the anti-American people. And Donald Trump repeated it last night. He said the world is taking advantage on us. Wokeism, misguided progressivism, has spawned Trumpism, a revolutionary conservatism, whose new champion, driven by his desire for revenge, could well call into question the foundation of American democracy. Hence, the exorbitant custom duties imposed on all countries against which Europe has failed to react firmly. For the worst or for the best, Donald Trump is following a policy already quietly pursued by Barack Obama and Joe Biden, but stated with unabashed frankness. He's a companion, he's a founder with Vladimir Putin of the Testosterone Club, this company of strong-armed leaders whose members include Erdogan in Turkey, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Bukele in El Salvador, and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. Like dominant males, they size each other up, raise their voices, and strike down their opponent. With an ally like Trump, Europe has to suffer dependence and humiliation. Even when he compliments his interlocutors, this president gives sometimes the impression of insulting them. Didn't say that all the leaders of the entire world would come and kiss his ass. The White House is now the seat of a kleptocracy that no longer hides itself. That said, and I feel sorry for the weakness of Europe, Donald Trump is also the best thing that could happen to us. As they say in English, he's a wake-up call, a rude awakening. He contrasts with the saccharine hypocrisy of his predecessor, who mixed bows and backstabbing. And now, of course, everybody remembers the AUKUS affair with Joe Biden, with the Australian submarines we have been taken from France and given to England and the United States. So Donald Trump's abruptness and vulgarity has a refreshing effect, like a glass of ice water thrown into the face of a sleeper. He has said what he will do, and he will do what he says. Let's take him literally and emerge from 70 years of military vassalism. How can we free ourselves from this invasive tutelage? First, we have to unite. We have 27 different military budgets instead of having one budget for 27 different countries. This would be a big saving in money. We could also stop buying weapons across the Atlantic and prefer European weaponry. Put, for instance, an end to the F-35 hegemony, which are already obsolete, favor European suppliers, develop clean digital technology, and use our power to retaliate. Already in France and elsewhere, associations are being formed to boycott American products, and as you know, many tourists avoided the United States this summer. We are stronger than we think, as we have 500 million consumers and citizens. One example, on August 18 of this year, in the Oval Office in Washington, European leaders plus Volodymyr Zelensky forced the American president not to sell out Ukraine to neighboring Russia. And we might have to do the same again next week, as Putin and Donald Trump are meeting in Budapest, and I think Donald Trump will try to do the same with Ukraine. To oppose Putin and Trump, three virtues celebrated by the ancient would be enough for us: courage, willpower, and tenacity. It would be enough to no longer be paralyzed by the president from Washington or by the gangster from Moscow. But as Spinoza stated, at the end of the ethics, everything that is precious is as difficult as it is rare. If we are not able to create a new defense association between Europe and the United Kingdom, we will have only a folding seat at the table of the master of the world. And nowadays, the master of the world are all predators. We will fall like a house of cards and be reduced to a deluxe sanatorium, piece by piece, by all sorts of predators. And maybe it's already too late, or maybe it's not too late. 3 times in recent history, Europe and France have held firm. The repeated Islamic attacks in 2015 in France, for instance, with Charlie Hebdo and the Bataclan, the COVID cataclysm and the war of aggression in Ukraine prove that the plaintive and fearful Europe of the people of the old world are still capable of great leaps forward. It is not the virulence of our enemies that we must fear. It is the hatred we feel for each other. The thunderous attitude of the American president may have frightened more than one person. But in his outbursts and anger, Donald Trump is developing a logic of force to which we must adapt. We have to respond in the same way. We have to become mature 80 years after World War II, at last. We have a choice in Western Europe. Either we remain in history, we assume our defense, we equip ourselves with the political and military instruments of a great power of the 21st century, or we leave it and we disappear. And we will only remain as a small, nice museum called France, Germany, Italy, Romania, England, but we will not exist anymore as political nations. Defeatism in Europe is the second home of privileged peoples, the sigh of fat cats purring in comfort. raised, cradled, and cuddled in the prosperous post-war world? Are we capable of facing the challenges of climate change, of massive illegal immigration, the return of war, and a large, rough ally who bullies us and puts us against the wall? It is for the time of irons that we must prepare, if only to avoid them. We are stronger than we believe. Our enemies are much weaker than they think. But unfortunately, our greatest enemies is inside us. It is called panic, self-hatred, and complacency in misfortune. If there is a lesson to be learned from the United States, it is the self-confidence, the trust in the power of time to improve the human condition, and at last the spirit of exploration. Perhaps do we need desperately a European Donald Trump, strong but polite leader, male or female, Iron Lady or Iron Man, if only to speak to him as an equal? Europe may remain the empire of weakness and powerlessness, in which case the great nations that compose it will have to draw the consequences. But if Europe becomes tomorrow worthy of the name, a power worthy of the name, she will owe it also to these two despisers of the law that are Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Left to itself, Europe will die of its virtues. Maybe it will recover from other people's vices. Thank you very much.
Questions? I believe that cards were passed out. Are there some questions?
C'est Paris. Pardon. Ah,
Yeah, I have one question here, very interesting, that came up at the end of Dr. Bruckner's speech. What is the rate of immigration into Europe, in particular from Muslim countries? How does that stand now?
Well, we received, I think last year we received about 500,000 migrants coming mainly from Muslim countries. It will be the same amount this year. And we have to recognize that Emmanuel Macron didn't do anything to curb it. And it's a major debate in Europe, and people are very touchy about him. But I think there should be a very simple answer to this issue. Immigration is a chance if it's chosen immigration, as it is the case in Canada or other countries. But if it is imposed through humanitarian reasons, I mean, if migrants come by flocks and by boats and just land on your coast and say, we're dying of thirst and hunger, you have to take care of us, I don't think this is a good method. So my opinion is that we should reward the migrants who have applied for coming to France or to England or to Germany, who learn the language, who know the laws of our country, who respect them, who especially respect in France what we call laïcité, which is a special way of special fashion of secularism in France, the separation of the church and the state. That's why in France, you know, the burqa is prohibited in the street, and the Islamic veil is prohibited also in schools. So this is very French, and it might trigger a discussion with Americans who are more liberal in that record. But yes, there is a feeling of an invasion from Muslim country, which changes demography. It changes the face of the French people. And in reaction to this flux of people, mainly composed of men. It's mainly men coming from Afghanistan. Now we have people coming from Gaza, which also is another issue, because they come with Gaza full of passion and hatred after what they've gone through. So I don't think it's. I think it's a really sensitive question, and so in reaction to this influx of migrants, the Catholics are waking up, and so you see in France something you didn't see 20 or 30 years ago. You see priests with their comment dire?
Their cassocks on? Their robes?
Their robes, yes, exactly. The bells are ringing now. Every day I live close to a church, the bells are ringing, and people try to reassert themselves. But we have had many terrorist attacks, and every month 3 or 4 terrorist attacks are being dismantled or being prevented, and which is very concerning. Those attacks are being waged by young people, most of the time coming from Catholic breeding, but they've been radicalized on social medias. So they receive a revelation: go kill your neighbor, and then you will be you will go to paradise, and you will be and male and female also. We have now young women of 14, 15, 16 who are being influenced by Islamist propaganda. It can happen like you have in America. You have also domestic terrorism, but anyone can take a knife and kill you in the name of God, and which is, in my view, a perverse view of religion. But so this is one of the consequences of immigration. The other consequence is that the state cannot afford to pay for all those hundreds and thousands of people that come every year and who enjoy, of course, the privilege of the welfare state, which is very generous in France. This explains, among many other reasons, why we are broke. As if you follow the news, we have a huge debt, but it's not only because of the migrants, it's also because we have a very generous system, too generous, probably, much more than any other country in the world. Because in France, the state takes us in its hands from the birth to the death, free education, free medicine. And 75% of the French are tired of illegal immigration. In some streets in the suburbs of Paris, you have 125 nationalities. People do not speak the same language. People don't learn the French. And so they go into the gangs of the narco traffickers, which are very strong now. They come from South America through Morocco, and then they go to France, Belgium, Netherlands. They have strong armies, and they threaten the judges. And the Prime Minister of Belgium has been threatened by gangs. The same in Holland. So it's a very touchy situation, and we should at least give the French people the feeling that the state controls the situation. But in fact, the state does not control anything. And this is why people lend their ears to the populist parties, because the populist party puts their fingers on a real problem. It's not racism, as the left says. It's not a fantasy. It's real. Where I live in Paris, in Le Marais, it's a very fancy area close to the Musée Picasso. 5 minutes away from my home, when I go shopping in the morning, you have tents of young African people who sleep there for now about 2 years, And in the name of generosity, we open our borders, but they have no job, they have no food, so they survive on public charity. But this is totally indignant, and we should say to, as Giorgia Meloni does in Italy, and I think she's, whatever we think of her, she's having a good policy. We should deal with the government of Africa or Middle East and say, we don't want your citizens. Now we're going to make a deal. We're going to conclude a treaty, and we pick up the people we want, and you keep the rest with you, and you develop your own country. France doesn't want to do that in the name of the Republican ideal, but this formula doesn't work. So unfortunately, I have to say that when J.D. Vance and Donald Trump criticize France and Europe, well, they're not always wrong, because we have to recognize that they speak the truth by, and it's hard for me to recognize it, but it's true. Even and in Europe, we have countries that have decided to follow a new policy. Denmark is driven by a leftist coalition, but they decided to cut off immigration by half, and it's a success. The same thing will happen in Sweden, which has been very disappointed with immigration also. And I quoted Italy, and I think the next president in France, man or woman, will have to do the same. We cannot cope with this massive influx of people whose competences are not always so obvious. So, you know, it started in 2015 with Angela Merkel opening the borders of Germany to Syrians. But we have to say that the Syrian refugees were, for most of them, were engineers, scientists, driven out by the crackdown of Assad. So they were competent, and so they learned German and they helped the German economy. But it's not the case for the new migrants. So we have to change the things.
It's very interesting, and I should just point out one thing, and that is that the Islamist terrorists that attacked France terribly in 2015 in particular, the attack in November 2015 killed 130 people. All of those, there were only 3 French members of that terrorist team. All the rest were foreign, from Belgium or from the Middle East, and they had all come through Europe without any hindrance at any of the borders at that point in time. I have another very interesting question here, which is kind of the other point of your discussion is, do you believe the EU will last, or do you think that it will eventually collapse and the other European countries will follow Britain in its Brexit?
Well, if it goes on, well, it's very simple. If it goes on like this, it will lapse. It cannot continue as it does. If we don't have a strong management, if we don't have a strong, I don't know, president of the EU, but at least a leader that can resist the orders of Putin, or even that can deal with Trump on an equal foot, Europe will remain, as I said in my expose, the empire of powerlessness. And so the nations that compose Europe will rebel against this tutelage and to regain their sovereignty. So maybe Brexit was a mistake. That many citizens of Britain recognize it, but it might be also the future of Europe if we don't wake up. As I said, it's a wake-up call. If we don't wake up, if we still beg help from the USA, just take a small example. It's so easy to understand. Zelensky went to Washington hoping to receive the Tomahawks from the United States. Donald Trump said, no, I don't want to deprive my army of those weapons. Okay, he said no. That is frank. But why Europe does not replace US Tomahawks with European weapons? For instance, the Germans, they have the Taurus, which is a very good missile. which could destroy many military sites in Russia, and it could help the Zelensky. Why do we have to beg the Americans for their weapons? We have them. Let's use them. You know, there is something incomprehensible for me. And this situation has been lasting for 80 years now. And so every time it's a promise. Oh, now we're gonna do something. Now we're gonna have the strongest army. Friedrich Merz, the Prime Minister of Germany, recently said we're going to spend 100 billions of euros to build the strongest army of Europe. But nothing will happen, because now we know the Germans will never be soldiers again. They left militarism for mercantilism, and they will remain commerciants and tradesmen, merchants. But the Poles, who know the Russians, have now one of the strongest army in Europe. 300,000 men with good military material. Yes, the specter of dislocation is still possible in the coming years.
So as a follow-up to that, what do you think the future of NATO is?
Well, NATO will follow the pace of Europe. If Europe is strong, NATO could survive Europe, and we could revive the alliance between the United States and Europe. We always have to remind our American friends that France and America are the only countries in the world which never went at war. Never. We were almost on the brink of going at war, I think with Napoleon or with some other leaders, but it never happened. So it's important to remember that. But if Europe disappears, NATO will disappear, and it will enter what Emmanuel Macron said in 1217. NATO is in a state of cerebral death, which in fact was not true. But so I think we should revive NATO and maybe make it more independent from America and make it maybe more European. But for the moment, it's very fragile again. And you know, once again, Trump is rough. He's vulgar, but at least he says the truth. He says you're weak. You're nothing. You depend on us, and we're gonna pressure you until you wake up, or then we will reject you.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about the situation in France? As most of you probably know, France is in complete turmoil at this point, and how do you see that resolving itself?
Oh my God, yes, I don't want to sound pessimistic tonight too much, but you know, my country is a sick man of Europe. Oh, there are many factors, but first we have a very narcissistic president who did well in his first term,
Yeah.
and then did bad in his second one. He was reelected because you know, the alternatives in front of him are not very good. It's the far left or the far right, and there is no strong leader capable for the moment to replace him. So what happened? The president decided last year to dissolve the parliament because he didn't have the majority in the legislative election, and he decided to start again, to try again, and he lost. And France was divided in 3 blocks: left, center, right. And none of these 3 blocks is capable of leading the country. And so the situation went worse during the summer. We had a new prime minister who said, "Oh, we have a huge debt, incredible debt. I think it's 3,000 billions of euros. We have to reimburse it, or we will have the IMF very soon in Paris, like Greece 10 years ago, like Portugal, like Spain." And so this new prime minister called François Bayrou, who comes from the southwest, from the Pyrenees, was immediately hated by everyone. because the French like to spend more than they produce, like everyone. And so the French said, no, we will change nothing to our system. It's the best system in the world. And we have to pressure the rich. So we have to understand that France, of course, is the heir to the 1789 French Revolution. We tried to behead we beheaded, in fact, the aristocrats, the priests, the archbishops, and the rich. And so in the French mind, there is still this souvenir of the French Revolution. And for those, maybe if some of you saw the ceremonies of the Olympic Games last year, you may have seen an image of the Queen Marie Antoinette with her head in her arm. It had been made by a professor of the Collège de France, a mandarin, as we say, I don't know how you call that, a member of the elite, who found it very funny to remember that France was founded of the decapitation of the king and of the queen. And of course, it sends shivers into our spine, because it's not an episode which we are very proud of nowadays. But anyway, so during the summer, a new idea emerged from the left, saying we have to tax the rich, tax the entrepreneurs. We have 1,800 families whose budget is superior to 100 million euros. We have to tax them by 2%, and it will bring the 10 billion of euros to France, and it will be very good, and everybody will be satisfied, and we do not touch our political and social system. Then there was an upsurge from the entrepreneurs of France. And so we said, if you do that, we close the firm, we close the factory, and we leave. Okay? The world is vast, and we have a very nice country, neighboring country, which was called Italy. And Italy, by a miracle, which is really the Italian genius, Italy is now the new heaven, how to say?
Haven.
Heaven for rich people. Milan is one of the richest cities in Europe. You have billionaires from all over the world, and Italian economy is blossoming, much more than French economy. And they say, okay, you want to tax us, you want to kill us, and fine. But you'll do that 1 year. But next year we will go and we will settle our fabrics, and we will comment on dit délocaliser?
We'll move away.
We'll move away from France, and you will impoverish thousands of French workers. And there is one. We have one success in a new tech in France. It's a new industry. It's called Mistral. It's been founded by 3 young people, whose the boss is called Arthur Mensch. He's 31 years old. It's a kind of it's a new miracle economy. It's like Palo Alto in California, and he raised funds for 10 billion euros. And the leftist leaders said, 10 billion, my God, it's too much for him. He should give us back half of it for the French people. And the guy explained, if you withdraw 5 billion from my industry, I will have to close. It's over, you know. This money does not belong to me. I am investing, hoping for future profits. And this new tax is called the tax Zuckman. And so during the summer, we have had a series of new governments. The longest lasted 4 or 5 months. The shortest lasted 12 hours. So there we are now. So we have a new government. And yes, it's very sad. In fact, it's very sad. And so what do the French? do, they save. We have a huge saving account in France. I think it's about 9 billion euros, because the French don't want to invest. They are waiting. We call this in France le bas de laine. I don't know if there is a translation. That, you know, the French used to put their money under their mattress in a sock, and when the banking system was not well developed, and that's what we do. So France remains a very rich country, immensely rich. We have a huge patrimony, but if we don't have any stability, we don't want to, you know, to take risk. So the main difference between the Americans and the French, you are a nation ready to embrace the risk because you've been founded on it. When we are careful and timid nation, and so we will be much more cautious to invest our money in risky plans or risky projects. But anyway, it's a mess. C'est le bordel, as we say in France. So every day we're waiting for the fall of the government and the rise of a new one. But we have known this situation in after World War II, the Fourth Republic, and de Gaulle founded the Fifth Republic to avoid this kind of situation, this kind of political instability. So, you know, we are becoming resilient, and we are waiting. And the civil society is strong, and so we are waiting for better days, and it will we'll get a solution one day.
So we won't conclude on it's a mess. We'll conclude on a
in France it's a mess, but it's still a very pleasant country to live in. I have to say that in my area, 1 person out of 2 in the street is American. Americans are buying an apartment in Paris. They come and live in Paris. They feel very well. We have many stars. We have many celebrities. And Paris is becoming again what it used to be after World War II, an American city where people feel free. So come and invest in our country. We'll be delighted to welcome you. And, you know, in the stone, you take no risk. Paris has never failed, has never disappointed investors. It's the most beautiful city in the world, and it's worth to buy. They buy castles, buy mansions. The countryside is wonderful, and it's really worth.
Yes. Well, thanks so much.
Oh, it's finished?
French.
Oh, my God. Okay. C'est fini?
Thank you all for coming, and it's been very interesting, a lot of food for thought, and we'll hope to see you for our next event. Okay? Thank you again.